Good morning, Team Alabama. We are ready for some more of Hidden Figures, and we are on chapter 22, page 185. America is for everybody. America is for everybody, said the U.S. Department of Labor brochure issued in April of 1963. The cover showed a young African-American boy, barefoot and dressed in a shirt and worn jeans, sitting on a dusty railroad track. In the next, President John F. Kennedy and Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson described the social and economic progress that African Americans had made since the end of slavery 100 years before. One of the inspirational photographs inside the pamphlet showed Katherine Johnson working at her desk at Langley, already hard at work on the calculations that would one day help send an astronaut to the moon. The same year that brochure was published, A. Philip Randolph, the civil rights leader who had pushed President Roosevelt to open war jobs to African Americans during World War II, planned the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, inviting political and religious leaders and even well-known singers of many backgrounds to participate. On August the 28th, 1963, an estimated 300,000 people marched through the nation's capital, gathering on the National Mall to hear a series of speeches. The defining moment of the event came when 34-year-old Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. addressed the crowd. Shortly after he began speaking, Mahalia Jackson, one of the singers who had been invited to perform at the event, urged Dr. King to share his deepest feelings with the crowd. "Tell them about the dream, Martin," she said to him, urging him to speak to the crowd from his heart. King knew she was right. He set aside his prepared remarks and put both hands on the lectern. He then gave his country and the world 17 of the most memorable minutes in history. Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech reminded all the citizens of the nation that the African American dream and the American dream were one and the same. Here's a picture of Dr. King in the National Mall. The dream at Langley. In many ways, Dorothy Vaughan was living the American dream. The director of the Langley Research Center sent Dorothy a letter acknowledging her 20 years of service to the federal government. He presented her with a gold and ruby lapel pin during the center's annual awards ceremony. And by the standard of their families and many associates, Dorothy and the other African American employees at NASA had secured professional jobs and the respect of their colleagues. They were part of the vision that Martin Luther King Jr. and the President Kennedys and Johnson had for a more tolerant and just America. But there was still progress to be made. Even at Langley, of all the black employees working in research at Langley in the early 1960s, there were only 5 categorized as engineers and 16 with the title mathematician, including Dorothy. Langley's director wrote to NASA's headquarters in Washington, D.C., lamenting that very few Negroes were applying for open science and engineering positions at the laboratory. There is no doubt that one of the reasons they do not apply is that they do not believe that the living conditions in the area would be favorable to them, because the Langley Research Center, which is completely integrated, is situated in a community where social segregation based on color is still practiced to a certain extent, he wrote. Langley redoubled its recruiting efforts, and in the mid-1960s, with dreams of working at NASA, greater numbers of African American college students found their way to the research center. The next generation. When she wasn't at work, Katherine Johnson spent a great deal of her time at community service activities and at church. After church one Sunday in 1967, Katherine saw a new face in the crowd. She went over and introduced herself to the young woman, who was there with her husband and 2 daughters. "I'm Katherine Johnson," she said. "Yes, I know," said Christine Mann Darden. "You're Joylette's mother." Katherine's daughter, Joylette, had met Christine in college at Hampton Institute. Katherine and Christine had met once before at a sorority function, though they hadn't seen one another in years. Since graduating from the Hampton Institute, Christine had started working as a math teacher and had gotten married. Earlier that spring, she had completed her master's degree program at Virginia State University, a black college, and she had visited the school placement office during her final semester of study. "We wish you'd been here yesterday," said the placement officer. "NASA was here interviewing." The woman handed Christine an application for federal employment. Christine applied, and NASA offered her a position as a data analyst. Once in the Hampton Roads, she saw Katherine Johnson and the other former West Computers on a regular basis, both at work and in the community. Christine had gone to school with Katherine's daughters, and she already felt a connection to her. Christine was part of the next generation of women at NASA, those who would rely on the pioneers like Katherine and Dorothy and Mary for inspiration and guidance. Okay, we're going to stop there for today. Have a great rest of your day, Team Alabama. We will talk more. If you are not finished with your 50 facts, please go ahead and get those turned in.